let me bring on Joey from Texas, who's saying only Jesus can save. That's a pretty bold claim. Let's see. Hi, Joey.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that only Jesus can save in terms of
what?
Like of our lives, in terms of our
what do I need
condition and life.
What's wrong with my life? I need to be saved from it. I have a really great life, by the way. I have designed it very well, and I enjoy every minute of it. So why do I need to be saved from it?
It's the state of its temporariness. It's like we should look to things above and not things below. It's like there's things that.
Why should I not focus having as much enjoyment as possible in this moment, given that I could die tomorrow or die in my sleep or die in 20, 30, or 40 years? I should enjoy every moment of it, shouldn't I?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. It's like the heart of the afflicted, right, is evil like every day. But he who has like a joyful heart is...
I have a joyful heart. I have no God in my life. I have no God looking over me. I don't believe that a God is necessary to anything, and I have a very joyful heart. I had an absolute blast yesterday. I had an absolute blast earlier today, and next weekend when I go scuba diving, I'm going to have another absolute blast. In my week in between, I'm going to have some fun times. Not an absolute blast because I got to go to work, but that's life. So again, I have all these things you claim I only need Jesus for, and yet I don't have Jesus. So what? What is Jesus saving us from?
Death.
Death? Now that would be cool. Can you prove that Jesus can save us from death? And how would you do that?
He's the only person
that would be amazing. Yeah, tell us if you have proof. That I would sign up for that. How do you know that?
By the testimony of the apostles and the written.
Well, so here's the problem. You've got a book, you call it the Bible, that says Jesus rose from the dead. I've got another book called the Dresden Files, where Harry Dresden's also risen from the dead. And I've got a third book, right, called The Lord of the Rings, in which Gandalf rises from the dead. So how do I tell which of those three actually happened?
The Jews are the witness for God.
I have witnesses for the resurrection and the other two stories as well.
Yeah, Joe, there's no witnesses. There's the claims of witnesses. How do you know the claims of witnesses is true? There's claims to have, like, you don't actually have the witnesses. There are people who claiming that there were witnesses. How do you know that claim is true?
It's well, how do you know that a claim is true? To the point that these people testified on behalf of the things that Jesus said, to such a degree where they were willing to give their lives for it. If they made it up.
How do you know that anyone was willing to give their life for it?
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
Go ahead, Armin.
Sorry. There are a lot of Muslims. Do you believe in Islam? Do you believe Prophet Muhammad is real, like he was a prophet, and Allah is real, and Muhammad was his prophet? Do you believe that?
I believe that Muhammad was a false prophet that Jesus warned about.
Okay, now do you believe that Muhammad was sent by Allah by God to bring us to give us his message? Do you believe that?
No, because
the answer is no. You don't believe. No, okay. So there are a lot of people who have died for that claim, and are willing to die for that today. In fact, there are a lot of people who are dying for this claim as we speak right now in Israel, right? So just because people are willing to die for something that they believe to be true, it doesn't make it true. So that's not good evidence. Do you have anything else?
It's not. Well, we have to consider the context. It's like they're willing to die on behalf of what somebody told them, but the apostles were witnesses, so they were willing to stake their life on their own.
That's what we're trying to establish.
Well, so Armin, he's saying that there are eyewitnesses to what Jesus did. And here's my question. How do you know any of them died that way?
Peter, in 2 Peter, the last book that Peter wrote, he mentions himself by name, that I, Peter, an apostle of Christ. Like he's testifying that he already perceives that his time is coming.
So what?
Given his life up
How do you know that any of these people died for their ability? Any of the eyewitnesses died? Oh, let's leave Peter out because there is something with Peter, but how do you know any of the others did? And if you don't know, I can tell you how you know that.
All we need is one witness to be confirmed and true. Like we
have people who, by your logic, Jim Jones and David Koresh are both true prophets.
No, it's because the apostles were Jews and they witnessed Jesus as the Messiah.
And people witness both those individuals do things and say things, and they believe them, and they died for those directly. So you've got the exact same situation being set up in real life. By your logic, those two are true prophets. There's no difference between your claims for Jesus and their claims for Koresh and Jim Jones. No difference.
Not only that, Joey, the claims about Jesus, we constantly evolved in that environment. Like, not only what you're saying is not reliable evidence, we actually have evidence that they kept on increasing Jesus's powers and the claims that they were making about him through time. We have evidence
just through the Gospels. Just through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? John, Jesus is very supernatural. Mark, the first one, not so much. So, yeah, you even have that improving in storytelling happening within the Gospels.
Yeah, we can see how Jesus' story was evolving, just like every other religious figures throughout history. Like, we see how Muhammad's story was evolving. We see how Jesus' story was evolving. We see how Shiva's story was evolving. So your myth, your God, was the claims that people around him were making about him, like in that environment, was behaving in the same way that we see with every other religion, which makes them unreliable.
The thing is, it's like you make the claims that the Bible was progressively getting bigger, or like the story, and it's like,
it's within your own Gospels.
Go read Mark. Go read Mark and find me one supernatural element of Jesus' story, except for the resurrection, because that's the only supernatural in Mark. And then go look at John. Right. And then you go look at Matthew. Matthew is like 80% word for word what's in Mark. And John contains a lot of Mark word for word as well. So you don't have four separate stories. The only story that doesn't have a lot of Mark in it is Luke. So you got 3 out of the 4 stories directly copying from the first one, Mark. How do you get to any of this stuff? Because you can see how things get added into the story, just like we see in other stories.
It's not that they were adding to the story. It's just that it's a narrative. It has a beginning, middle, and end. And the stories are going to align in similar fashion because it has a beginning, middle, and end. And therefore,
right. And so I agree. So here's the evolution of the story. In Mark ends very powerfully with the women running away and said nothing to nobody. So how we know that Jesus actually rose from the dead when they said nothing, we don't really know. But then you have somebody coming along and saying, oh, well, how do you know he rose from the dead? How do you know his body wasn't stolen? And then all of a sudden you get guards, Roman guards. Oh yeah, Roman guards. They're on duty. Well, then how did he walk out? Oh, you get this evolution of the story that is simply because, and the most logical reason is because of objections people rose to the story in the beginning. And so you have to overcome those objections. How do you do that? You add stuff to the story, right? And that's the problem, because you don't have any evidence for Roman guards. In fact, I would say that we come up with some pretty good reasons why there wouldn't be Roman soldiers in front of that tomb. It just doesn't make any sense. Not from a military point of view, and you certainly wouldn't send your best soldiers for that duty. As a former soldier myself, and I think most soldiers agree, you send your scrubs, your people most likely to fall asleep in that duty. But again, all you've got are these stories. So how do we know that these stories are true?
And Joey, do you know that some early Christians testified that Jesus flew around like Superman in the sky? Like, did you know that was part of the stories?
So those are myths, because what happened was that there was the testimony of Christ, and then there was various other stories that were developed around the true story, which was told.
Yeah, these are part of the Gospels that were not accepted by the Constantine and all the other the Roman Christians. Many years later, Christians decided which stories should be canonized and which stories should not be canonized. This story didn't make it in. Jesus flying around like Superman didn't make it in. Like, you are trusting those Roman scholars and the Roman Empire for your religion. Like, you are putting your faith in men deciding which stories were real and which stories weren't. If they had picked the story of Jesus flying around to be canonized in the Bible, you would have now believed in it.
Right. And the stories that we have for everybody but Peter, all the apostles but Peter, being put to death for their beliefs. And Peter, I think we make an argument that Peter wasn't put to death for his beliefs, but for their beliefs, all come from Gospels that aren't in the Bible.
Right.
Period. You don't have any evidence that people died for a lie. You don't have any of them die. They all just walk off stage, and we don't ever hear from them again in any of the canonized Bible. We only get that from Bible stories that have been rejected. And if they've been rejected wholesale, why should we believe any of them?
Yeah, why? Yeah, exactly, Joey. Why is it that the parts of Christianity that you think are true happen to be exactly the same parts that people many years later within the Roman Empire decided that to canonize, and for some reason every single one of them that was rejected by the people many years later in the Roman Empire happened to be exactly the ones that are not true? If it was other books, wouldn't you be basically saying those other claims are true if the Roman Empire canonized those ones within the Bible?
Oh, it's because the same things that they saw as inconsistencies within the Testament, especially if they knew if they were from other sources, they would have left those out.
No. It was completely political. It was based. If you actually go read the history, it was basically based on what was what gave them the most political power. It was a completely political game. It was not based on which one is actually true.
That's based on opinion. That's
well, I mean,
the claim itself.
Go read the history. Go read the history. So if you agree that we had Christians early Christians claiming that, go on.
Yeah. So just to clarify Armin's point, the whole reason why they had the council to figure out what was true was because there were so many stories and they had to figure it out. What stories were true and what weren't. And so they took all the stories and they came up with a common narrative, and they said, these are all the ones that are there. And, some books like Revelation were very controversial because they knew that Revelation was about Rome and not about the future. And yet some folks convinced people that it was about the future and not just about the end of Rome. So you have all this stuff, and it was political because it had to be, right? We had to figure out which one was right. And so they brought all the stories together and threw out the ones they didn't like. But you look at their reasoning, and that's all they were doing. They were reasoning. They didn't actually how would you prove that God inspired them somehow? How would you go about proving that God inspired the council that put the Bible together in its final form or nearly final form was inspired by God? How would you prove that?
I think that the Holy Spirit does work. It's not something that can.
But I that's your claim. I'm asking you to prove it.
It's not provable in any testable method.
Is it reasonable to believe in things you can't prove are true? Is it reasonable to believe things are true that you cannot prove are true?
If you can justify by means of reason through faith, because faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
Is faith a reliable way to figure out whether a claim is justifiable? Is faith reliable?
Faith is reliable through reason.
So we
have reason, we have faith. We have two things. We have two tools here.
If I have faith that you're a bunch of gerbils in a human suit, How would I go about? Can I have faith in that, and then does that make that true that you're nothing more than gerbils any human sin?
There's no reason behind it besides
what
the claim. But
what it's just faith.
You define faith, Joey. Define faith for us.
Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And there's
okay. So what you describe goes against reason. So you cannot say faith through reason.
Right.
You say believing in things that doesn't have any evidence. That is basically the opposite of reason. So we have reason, which we know is one of the most reliable ways. So we have rationalism. We have empiricism. Empiricism is one of the best way that we have right now to come up with conclusions. After that is rationalism, which is not as reliable, but is pretty good if we don't have empirical data. And now you have faith. So we know the utility of rationalism and empiricism. Tell us what's the utility of faith. Why should we use that tool to figure out what's true and what's not?
It's because to some degree, every belief requires a degree of faith, because you have to take by faith that something is true.
No. It doesn't. If I use you based on your definition of faith, if I have any evidence for my claims, I'm not using faith based on exactly the definition that you just gave us.
It's like, what was that?
I said, based on the definition that you just gave us for faith, if I have any evidence for my claim, I'm not using faith.
Well, that's the thing. Like, your claim is still, like, we can find evidence for these things, but it's not.
Well, if I find evidence, then I'm not using faith. If you give me evidence, then you're not using faith based on your own definition. So for your method to work, you have to show us why not relying on evidence is a better way. You just told us what you mean by faith. So we should not be using evidence. Tell us why you think that's a proper way for us to come up with a conclusion. I make a claim A, okay? I have no evidence for it. You want to prove to me that A is true. You're going to use faith. Tell me why. How do you know faith is a good, reliable method for you to show me that A is true?
Okay, I will agree with this. You do have a point. Because in terms of requiring evidence, it's as Jesus said, it's blessed are those that have not seen yet believe. So there is a degree in which faith is separate from evidence, but blessed are those that have not seen yet believe.
Okay, so why is this now explain to me, now that we understand that faith does not require evidence, tell me why it's a good way. Why should let's say, for example, you're making a claim and the only tool you have in your toolbox to show me that your claim is true is faith. Why should I trust your methodology? Why does this tell me? For example, when I want to show you why empiricism is a good, reliable way for us to come up to distinguish between a belief that is more likely true than not true, I have a lot of evidence for it. I could explain that to you. Now you do that with faith for me. Why is somebody that is using faith to claim that A is true will make A more true, will make A reliable, a justifiable belief if we apply faith to that claim? How do you know that?
It's like I mentioned, faith. Well, it's like I mentioned before. It's like there is there's blessed are those that have not believed, that have not seen yet believed. And
I understand that they're blessed. I understand that you're saying that they're blessed. That's not my question. Okay. My question is, how do you know faith works as a way for us to show what is real? Do you understand that faith as a methodology is completely random? Because if I could say A is true with faith, I could say use that on anything. It has no limitation. The main characteristics of rationalism and empiricism is that it does not leave your hand open. There are limitations. But faith has no limitation. Given that it has no limitation, any random claim that you could make, applying faith to it will mean that it's true. If it has no limitation, do you understand what the floodgates of insanity that you're opening to us if you apply faith? Any claim could be true with faith. I only have to come and say I have faith, and then you have to accept it as a methodology.
But
that's what Jim is trying to do. That's what Jim is trying to do when he says, like, oh, I have faith that you're, I don't know, 5 raccoons in a suit. That's what he's trying to show you. He's trying to show what poor of a methodology this is.
Exactly. There's nothing I can't have faith in, right? I could have faith that 1 + 1 = 3. I could take that simply on faith. Not, who was it? Dr. Dino, not Hovind, the other one, the Aussie. Anyway.
Oh, we cut Jim. We lost your audio. I think you're muted. You're muted. Jim is muted. I see your mic is muted. All right. So Joey, well, Joey, do you understand what we're trying to say here? Do you understand why we have a problem? Like, even if you don't agree with this, do you understand why we're saying this? Do you see where we're coming from? Like, you have a belief. We don't agree with your belief, but we want to try to see if maybe you're right. Maybe we're wrong and you're right. So you are using faith. You're holding our hand and you're trying to walk us through this, and you're trying to get us into a destination. But before we hold your hand, we have to trust that the methodology that you're using to get us to a destination works. Do you understand the problem we have in here?
What I trust is in Jesus. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. But
Jesus is the conclusion. Jesus is the claim. You're making a claim, okay, which is Jesus. Before we accept, you trust Jesus. You're talking to us. We don't trust Jesus, okay? You who trust Jesus is trying to tell us why we should trust Jesus, okay? So you cannot just come to us and say, I trust Jesus. We haven't gotten there yet. We are pre-trusting Jesus. So before you could get us from pre-trusting Jesus to trusting Jesus, we have to see what methodology that you have to prove a claim. If we don't trust your methodology, we can't even begin to take the first step with you. So before you prove Jesus to us, you have to prove the methodology to us. Your methodology is faith. How do you know it works? How do you know it works?
I've personally witnessed events in my life, and it's stuff that if I told you,
but that's not faith.
Jesus mentioned.
That's not. If you witnessed it, let's say you witnessed it and it proved your claim, that's evidence. I don't think that's evidence, but if it was actually an observation that matched reality, then you're not using faith. You're telling us that without evidence, we have to believe in something. That is faith. If you actually saw what you ended up believing in, then you are, I would say, poor evidence, but you're at least using some sort of evidence. So that's not faith. Tell me why faith works. You just told me unseen. You told me that believing in things that you have not seen, and now you're telling me that you saw something. That's not unseen.
And what I'm getting at is, or what I wanted to say is, it's like I'm having faith in the Word of God. It's not something, for the things which are seen were made by things that are not seen. It's like
we're past that. Joey, we're past that. We heard that part. Okay, I understand what you mean by faith. I understand what it means. I understand your explanation. Now tell me why it's a good tool. Why is it a good tool for me to figure out what's right and what's wrong? Why is it a good tool?
I'm not making that claim. I'm just saying that salvation is by faith, and we have to have faith. It's not.
Why did you? Okay, if you're calling in to just make claims, are you interested in us agreeing with you, or are you just here to just make claims? Like, why are you telling us? Are you trying to change your mind, or are you just interested in people knowing what you believe in? Do you want us to also agree with you? Do you want us to agree with you?
I would hope, yeah. Okay,
so to do that, you cannot just tell us what you believe. You have to also tell us why we should believe why you believe. The why here, we need the why, okay? Just repeating it's not going to help anybody. If you repeating what you believe, it's not going to help anybody. I could just sit here and tell you, 100 times that I believe in Allah and Muhammad as his prophet. It's not going to do you anything. It's not going to help at all. Are you gonna agree with me just because I repeat a claim? You're just repeating a claim. You have to give us something more. So we heard your claim. Now we're asking why. You're not giving us a why.
Yeah, we need reason to believe
the promised Messiah that was witnessed.
So again, now we go back to, so you're going back to the Bible, and we don't care because we need to prove that the Bible is true, right? There are elements of the Bible that are true. That's why I call it historical fiction, right? So, but the supernatural claims, burning bushes, the Egypt, the flood, all these supernatural claims still need to be proven, and they haven't been proven yet. So now, and you keep going back to this, book 2, fulfilling the prophecies in book 1 is just a trope. We see that all the time. So again, I don't have any reason to believe that the Bible is true or that the Bible is anything more than historical fiction. So you got to give me a reason to believe that it's something more than historical fiction. And you can't point to the Bible and its internal consistency for that, because I would expect that in any well-written book.
Jesus is the bridge to that, where it's like Jesus was God.
Joey, do you understand? Do you understand the difference between making a claim and giving a reason for that claim? Do you understand the difference between those two things? Do you understand the difference between those two things? Do you, Joey? Can you hear me? Do you understand the difference between giving a claim and then giving a reason for that claim? Do you understand the difference between those two things?
Yeah, and my reason is that Jesus was witnessed to be the promised Messiah by.
How do you know any of those
That's
witnesses
a claim.
exist?
Testament to that.
Right. How do you know any of those witnesses actually existed and they just aren't characters in the book?
Because are writing themselves, like I, Peter, I, Paul, like the apostles. Everything is
none of the gospels are claimed. None of the gospels are claimed. None of those gospels make the claim that those are the authors. That's the problem. That's why most biblical scholars today don't accept as true the claim that these are eyewitnesses, because nowhere do they actually make that claim. I don't even think Luke does, but I might be wrong about that.
They do.
What can you give me the verse?
Peter
give me the verse in Mark where Mark claims that it is Mark speaking.
Okay, just because an author doesn't identify themselves doesn't mean that the author didn't write that.
Then how do you
making the claim?
How do you come to the conclusion that Mark was written by Mark? What is your evidence?
Yes. You're making the claim, Joey. You're making the claim.
I'm going by faith that Mark wrote the book of Mark, and I'm having faith in.
How do you know that?
In its entirety.
How do you know that? How do you know that?
I have because through my own reason, I have reasoned that these books could have not been fabricated.
How did you reason your way? How did you reason your way to Mark was written by Mark? How did you come up to that reason, given that biblical scholars are, while it was true, if you go back 100 years ago, they all made the same claim, but modern biblical scholars are all saying, no, we had bad reasons to believe that. There is no good reason to believe that Mark was written by Mark. What was your reasoning to get there?
The Bible actually warns that for they will raise up teachers for themselves.
The Bible doesn't say Mark was written by Mark. The Bible doesn't say that the Gospel of Mark was written by Mark. There's nowhere that you can find this.
And that verse doesn't help you get there. That verse does not help you get there at all. It doesn't help you get to Mark. So how do you know that Mark was written by Mark?
I, by faith, choose to believe that Mark was written by Mark, but you have no evidence. Choose to believe.
You have no evidence. What? You're believing without evidence something that is true. That something is true without evidence. Is that rational to believe that something is true without evidence?
In its integrity of the Scripture, I
It's a
believe
yes or no question. It's a yes or no question. Is it rational to believe in something is true without evidence? It's a yes or no question.
It depends.
Yeah, thanks.
Depends
You're
on
now
what?
being dishonest. You're now being dishonest. Absolutely, you're being dishonest because it is not rational or reasonable to believe in things without evidence. You're not being rational because it is not rational to do that. You have to have evidence, and you have no evidence. The biblical scholars say we have no evidence to believe that Mark was written by Mark. The only reason that you do is because some scribe way back when decided to call it Mark. That's it. We have new original documents.
That's your claim, but you were.
No, we know that. We can go back and look at the early manuscripts and go, this story didn't have Mark's name attached to it here, and it has it here. So somewhere in between these two copies, somebody started calling it Mark. That is the actual evidence that we have. We can go back and look at that. That is the evidence. The manuscripts for Mark that we have that have no Mark, that are not attributed to Mark, and then all of a sudden they are. So we have that evidence, and that's what you have to go and look at to figure out if Mark is actually written by Mark. And how would we even know that? I mean, the only way to know that something was written by somebody, regardless of whose name on it, would be to do handwriting analysis or to find some sort of DNA on the pages, on the original pages, which we don't have. But you'd have to do some sort of handwriting analysis on the original, which we don't have. We don't have the original Mark, and we don't have any writings from Mark because, according to Acts of the Apostles, Mark was unlettered and untutored. He didn't know how to write. And so any way we got that would have to have Mark, a fisherman, a poor fisherman, coming up with enough money for a scribe for him to tell the story to. That's just the way that it works. And that's the way evidence works. So I would really like for you to come back and do some research on how we know Mark is actually Mark, and then come back and tell us. And I'd also like you to really think about my question: is it reasonable to accept something as true without evidence? And then if your answer is yes, examine what could I accept as true that would be reasonable without evidence.
Yeah. I mean, completely makes sense for, if you want to sell a book, just put a famous person's name on it and it sells better. Why not go?
Well, and there are book publishers who do that. There are book publishers who actually do that, especially in the Christian space. Kevin Sorbo is very, very mad on Twitter because people started pointing out he didn't actually write the book. It was just his name, and they just had some other problems with the book as well. But somebody else wrote it, and they put his name on it because it would sell books. They do that today. They did that in the medieval times too. I can point to a fencing manual written, originally written by an Italian author in Italy that has a completely different author in Northern Europe. It's a direct copy of this Italian author's, the Fiore della Berry's Flower of Battle. You can go look it up. It's a complete copy, somebody else's. So they plagiarized, and it worked because who's going to take a 3 or 4 month journey up to the north and go, you plagiarized that? It's much easier to detect plagiarism today. So that happens all the time.